Ladies and gentlemen, we will carry straight on into the next panel. So I'm very delighted to be moderating this event on powering up global energy goals. And I know you've been listening intently all afternoon, so we're going to make this a very punchy, very energetic powering up session. I'm just going to quickly introduce you to the very illustrious panel that we have here to give their views. So firstly, Elbia Ganoun, who's head of the Brazilian Wind Energy Association and the Renewable Energy Special Envoy for COP30. We have Andrew Pragg from the We Mean Business Coalition, and he's the Managing Director of Policy. Previously, he was head of the Climate Unit at the International Energy Agency as well. So fantastic to have you, Andrew. We then have Pallavi Singh, who is the Diplomatic Engagement Lead of the Power and Path Coal Alliance. Welcome, Pallavi. Great to be joined by Marcus Stewart, who is the head of the Green Grids Initiative. Welcome, Marcus. And then finally, Ben, who needs no introduction, Ben Backwell, who is the chair of the Global Renewable Alliance. So we'll be hearing from our speakers in turn. Just a couple of opening remarks. It was quite. I'm just going to tell a little personal story. It's very interesting to see Catherine McKenna earlier, and she doesn't know I'm going to say this, and I think she may have gone. But my previous stint at E3G was in 2016, 2017, and obviously that was Trump 1. And that year was very interesting in dealing with the politics of Trump 1. And of course, as Catherine would know, that was the year that the Power and Path Coal Alliance was formed as a big response to we are going to get mitigation done after the Paris Agreement. So it's interesting to reminisce and think about, under this new Trump presidency, we are approaching another key moment where we need to demonstrate that we're going to drive forward work on the energy transition. We've heard some fascinating stats today. I think what is fascinating is we are seeing particularly China is a case in point, we are seeing a tremendous deployment of renewable energy. I think I saw a stat from Ember, and I'll quote Ember because they're marvelous. I think China installed 90 gigawatts of renewable energy in May, just in May, which is more than Texas and California put together. But of course, at the same time, we had a record new coal starts for the first quarter of this year from China as well. So we're in this position where huge acceleration taking place, but we've still got to grip the transition from fossil fuel. So the panel today is going to be talking about, with COP30 fast approaching, what is it that we can do? What are the coalitions? What is the collaboration we need to deliver on our global stocktake energy package? The commitments to triple renewable capacity, double energy efficiency improvements, accelerate the phase down of coal, and transition away from fossil fuels. And there's a phrase I really love in the document, in the GST, which is accelerating action in this critical decade. So we're halfway through. I think it was said earlier, I think Eamon said earlier, we're half time and we might be 3-1 down. So what is it that we're going to do to get back on side and back winning? Delighted to be here, delighted to have this wonderful panel to run through these pieces, and really great to follow a discussion on how we mobilize finance, which we've just followed. So this is the second piece of how we mobilize and how we move and pledge on energy. So over to my wonderful panel. So I'm going to start with Elbia Ganoun, CEO and founder of Abeeolika. She's overseen a meteoric rate of installation, and Brazil has gone from an installed capacity of 1 gigawatt at the Association's foundation to over 15 gigawatt today. And she's here to tell us a bit more about her aspirations and visions for COP30. And in a year where there are so many tensions playing out, geopolitical and trade, it'd be lovely to hear about your vision for how COP30 can send a signal to investors to accelerate implementation. So over to you, Elbia.
Good afternoon. It's working? Yeah, I cannot hear. Thank you for the opportunity. It's so nice to be here in this panel with my friend Ben and Joaki and the other colleagues. And a great opportunity to talk about Brazil, about renewable, and about your big challenge that to prepare COP30. And in this context, I'm talking as a CEO of Eólica, but as a special envoy for energy in COP30. So it's interesting because Brazil is a country that is very renewable country when you talk about the electricity and the energy. Our electricity metrics is 93% renewable, and your energy matrix is 50% renewable. And when we are talking about energy transition, and that is very necessary to run with investments, we need to think what environment we can create to give more signs to invest in renewables. Brazil has a good experience. Of course, we have a lot of sources, and the sources could give us in this place in the last years. For us, energy, renewable energy is definitely a business. And I believe that the main point for the general word for global economy is about how we can transform energy transition in business. Better than this, in a good business. I believe that when we find the way to give the right signal that investments in energy, renewable energy is a good business, we will get it the way faster than we are going. In the last years, we see that in despite of a lot of objectives that we have, we cannot find the right way. Then I think in COP30, we are working now in discussion with the private sector, discussion with government, what we can put in discussion. And the first thing it's necessary to create a regulatory environment for this. We know that there are some countries that they are very clear regulatory framework, but that there are other countries that need to improve the regulatory frameworks. It's important to create financial conditions, and these financial conditions is associated the better way to put money and to receive the good return. We know that there are sectors like oil and gas, and the return is very high. And how we can create the same sign for investments in Brazil. Recently, our president of COP30, Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago, he has always reminded us that there will be the COP of implementation. To implementation, decisions that until now, since we start to discuss climate change and the energy transition, but now it's necessary to engage in society, to engage investors, to engage consumers for act. And the point is exactly how we engage these actors in the global economy. Then for us, it's important to show that investments in renewable can be security investment, can give a good return, and it's a very prosperity, not only in terms of environment, but it's prosperity in terms of investments. Then our discussion now, and I'm doing this job, this is very side job, is discussion with investors and society, and how we can create this clean way for investments. Then I believe that the way pass for the investments can be investments in renewable, can be a very, very good business. I don't believe that the global economy has been given this right signal yet. We need to push for this proposal. And in general, I believe this is the main point. In despite of some actions in the United States or other things, but we know that the way for energy transition is so clear, and a lot of investments going further. The point is necessary to put a little more fast. It's needed to be faster than that it has been. But I believe this is the main point.
Thank you so much. And so that message of making this a good business, you know, and ideas about how we're going to make that enabling very much stronger, and you know, perhaps related to the very sort of concrete ideas that were laid out last week around the action agenda and how that's going to be driven forward for the different sectors. So thank you for those opening remarks. I'm going to move on to Andrew. As I said, as Managing Director of Policy at the Mean Business Coalition, he's going to be talking about some of the work that they've done lately, in particular polling around business attitudes and what business is looking for, and you know, particularly against the backdrop of some of the mixed messages that we've been perhaps getting from the US administration and other voices this year. So how does this compare to what you're hearing from business leaders and sort of wider market trends? Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you for the invitation to be here at this such a wonderful event again this year. I must say it's quite intimidating having these statues staring at us from the wall. It's more intimidating than the real audience. But yeah, so maybe just quickly first, what is the We Mean Business Coalition, in case you don't know us? We are an international NGO working with the most progressive business organizations working on climate change, and founded now 10 years ago before the Paris Agreement as a way to just bring together the voice of ambitious businesses trying to move forward the agenda on climate change because they see that as part of their business case and their transition. So through our networks, we now count around 20,000 companies, so it's quite a wide business voice across different sectors. In terms of your question, and what are we hearing from businesses, you know, we do see quite a lot of noise coming from the United States, in particular around natural gas, the increase in exports in LNG, and it's interesting to see how this compares to numbers that we're seeing in the market and across the kind of business attitudes, which I'll come to in a moment. But what is clear is demand for electricity is certainly growing rapidly, notably because of AI and the training and use of AI models, but also the widespread electrification of the economy, which is a good thing, the electrification of transport, of industry, of heating, and so on, which we need if we're going to get close to our kind of net zero pathways. But it's also a good thing because it is, in our view, still renewables that are the cheapest and quickest way to meet that growing demand, despite this push towards gas in the power sector that we've been hearing. It's not only cheaper and faster, but also, of course, helps to isolate or insulate companies from the volatility of fossil fuel markets. And going to be a geopolitical expert to see that the events in the last few days and the threat on navigation in the Straits of Hormuz, that volatility is only going to continue. And with moving towards gas infrastructure, really locking in infrastructure for time to come. But what we're seeing in the numbers, first you touch on the market numbers, and then this important point around the business attitudes we're seeing. I mean, when we look at last year, clean power was already 40% of power generation globally, and solar PV alone was added twice as much as any other power generation source, and 4 times as much as new gas power generation. So, that kind of snapshot in time already shows that the market is choosing renewables there. When you add to that the trend we're seeing in prices, so solar and wind and batteries price declining, you quickly get into a model where gas becomes uncompetitive, especially where countries are dependent on LNG with its gasification, regasification costs, its environmental risks, and again, this volatility. So we see quite a positive picture there, and even looking at emerging economies and developing countries where this question of speed becomes important, because not only are there abundant solar and wind resources, but with the speed of demand growth for electricity there, we are now seeing wind and solar coming on stream much quicker than traditional fossil. Looking at gas turbines now, new project won't be on stream until 2030 at least, and yet renewables much faster. So that's a positive picture on the market numbers. Quickly then on business attitudes. So we co-commissioned this survey of business leaders earlier this year, together with Beyond Fossil Fuels and our esteemed colleagues at E3G. 1,500 business leaders across 15 countries, and what that showed is quite striking results. Firstly, 97% of these business executives want to see a quick transition towards a renewables-based system. So that was almost unanimous. and around half of them wanted to see that happen within 5 years, which is not even one business cycle. So incredibly bullish, fast message coming from there. What's interesting about the gas question is when you zoom in to ask them, how they want to see that transition happen, 2/3 of them said they want to see a transition from coal-based systems directly towards renewables with reinforced grids and storage, and not see gas as a transition fuel because of the risks of volatility and the lock-in I mentioned earlier. So that even held up talking to business people in currentently quite gas-reliant countries like Mexico, Japan, Italy. So that was, again, striking message from businesses just getting on with this in terms of business case. Interesting also when we asked them why it is they want to see that rapid transition, it was very sort of hard-nosed business reasons that came back at us. So 75% wanting to see it for improved energy security amongst their own businesses, and 77% saying they saw it as increasing economic growth and good for their competitiveness. So that is a really important message coming from business, that this is now about those businesses seeing their future competitiveness in this kind of transition. We are actually this week, as our We Mean Business Coalition, putting out what we're calling a new narrative for business with language that sort of puts these numbers into key messages framed totally around prosperity, picking up a word that Elvira used, around business case, around just businesses evolving, responding to risks in the way that businesses have always done. It's not about morality or values. It's about getting on with the job and responding to the business case. So just quickly, one final statistic from these business findings, which is my favorite one, because it's as a kind of policy wonk, is that 50% of these business leaders surveyed said that they would consider moving their operations and or supply chains to other countries if governments don't speed up this transition and provide the policy frameworks necessary. So that, as a policymaker, I'd be really listening to that. There's a kind of red flag. And we actually, in this country, I know the government has been listening, because I had some ministers referring to that finding even this week. So yeah, just to conclude that, very strong picture on renewables front. It does need the supporting policy, and on the demand side, businesses that we mostly represent, we hear a lot of them talking about electricity costs, as well as the need for policy certainty, access to finance, and skill supply, and so on. But just to quickly touch on that electricity cost one, really important. I mean, you can't just tell people that renewables is the cheapest cost of power. And this is true also of people, citizens, as much as businesses, but it has to be seen in their bills and their actual costs. So we need to make sure the market reforms happen so that we're not pricing power based on these volatile gas markets, and finally getting the incentives straight so that those costs are transmitted. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and particularly just picking out those pieces on the need for pace, the risks, more risks, as we're seeing in the last few days on fossil fuel supply. And again, I mean, the stats on the energy transition are staggering, and I'm just going to pick another one, which you touched upon, but the costs of solar and storage fell 22% just last year. It was the last stat I saw a few days ago, and 43% since 2019. So it's astonishing pace in terms of cost reduction there, but it needs to be felt by businesses and consumers. So I'm delighted to then pass on to Pallavi Singh from the Power and Pass Coal Alliance, which I name-checked earlier. I couldn't help it. Pallavi works every day in diplomatic engagement to work to advance coal phase-out globally, and coal really still is a thing. And I'm sure many of you would have seen the last week's long read in the FT talking all about coal in China and India. So very topical. Over to you, Pallavi. What do we need to do globally next?
So I thought we'd start off by, since the last London Climate Action Week, the UK exited coal in September 2024. So that is absolutely massive. It's quite funny getting the claps for something like this, but sure. But like an absolutely huge moment. And it really brought it home to me when, a few months ago, when myself and a few colleagues went to the National Coal Museum in Wales a few months ago, where it really, really demonstrates the global significance of this. Like, the South Wales was essentially the centre of the global coal industry, and so many entire communities have been built around it. So many of us in this room know that it wasn't an easy process to get to this space, but there's so much that we can all learn from this process. And yeah, it's being seen across the OECD as well. So Belgium, Austria, Sweden, Portugal, Slovakia, and just last week, Ireland phased out coal completely. Italy and Spain are on the cusp of a full phase out later this year. Last month, Latin America achieved a key milestone, shelving its last new coal plants. And even in Poland, like long seen, the heart of Europe's coal industry is reducing its coal use by a third and is Europe's fastest growing renewables market. So the change is happening. There's no single model. How a country phases out coal, as every country is different, but it's really great to see countries making these strides to implement their coal commitments. But also even outside the OECD, so since 2015, the global pipeline of new coal power plants has fallen by 76%. So that's since the Paris Agreement, so that's huge. But then also looking at the country level, so since 2022, Vietnam has shelved 90% of its planned coal capacity. And in China, solar plus batteries provide cheaper power than coal to meet peak demand. So Matt mentioned the FT piece last week, and some of you who I've spoken to today, we've seen how excited I am that we responded to that with my boss, Julia, with a letter to the editor, essentially saying that our message is, despite the changes in the global political landscape, the economic fundamentals remain unchanged. Coal is not cheap. So the challenge and what do we need to do next? So there's still so much more to do, like emerging economies. Many of these countries have young coal plants. The cost of capital is high. Demand for electricity is rising. Energy access and affordability are severe issues, and there's still a huge gap in infrastructure investment. So with that, why is this proving so hard? And ultimately, despite the fact renewables are cheaper almost everywhere in the world, many emerging economies are locked into coal use by long-term debts, contracts, inflexible grid systems, and regional economic dependence on coal. Like, the system is built initially for fossil fuels, not for renewables, and there's a lot that needs to happen to get that all working together. But still, despite that, there are some real bright spots of progress with pioneering projects to retire coal power. So in the Philippines, to Vietnam, to Chile, to South Africa, to the Dominican Republic. And a lot of these projects are repurposing coal assets into renewables. So really demonstrating how transitioning away from fossil fuels and ramping up renewables really are two sides of the same coin. So what now? Like, how to really close in on that the final piece, and we really need to work together so countries can realize the benefits of the clean transition, and this means working together to retire plants early, stop permitting new coal plants, and delivering job opportunities for people throughout the transition. It is ultimately about people. And to do that, international partners need to work with emerging economies to transform the challenges they face into like competitive advantages and prosperity. So as we look forward to COP30, here are a few things that we should be looking to do to try and really help countries deliver on the implementation that Elba mentioned. So we need to work together to increase the amount of and access to public and private finance for coal retirement. We need to share these lessons. There's so many lessons that can be shared among countries. The number of projects that are eligible for retirement and repurposing need to be lined up so then people know where they can invest. And then lastly, we need to keep continuing to tackle barriers to change, such as regulatory frameworks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. And as you said very clearly there, it's often said that our deployment of renewables is not balanced globally, and in lots of our key economies, the investment is not flowing because there is an oversupply, in many cases, of coal generation. And if we let that run for its 40-year lifetime, it is eating up the carbon budget, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of our chances of staying within 1.5 degrees. So that action is needed. Thank you so much, Pallavi. So we're now sort of going to the bigger system question of grids, and I'm delighted to welcome Marcus. I did check with him. Marcus's career in grids is 27 years. I think that's right in terms of previous work with the National Grid. So tricky technical questions, please do. And he doesn't look like a day past 30. And as many of you will know, as the head of the Green Grids Initiative, he has a particular catchphrase which has become synonymous, but I'm not going to say it because it's Marcus's catchphrase, and I'm sure he'll be saying that shortly. So Marcus, obviously, grids have become under great scrutiny over the last few weeks. Secure supplies of electricity as we electrify our economies further are going to be of principal concern. What needs to happen to ensure a robust transition from what is has been a fossil fuel-based electricity system to a renewable-based system? Over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Matt. First off, I think I'd just like to say, obviously the events in the Iberian Peninsula have been proven not to be the fault of renewables. I think that's really clear. So it's not a question around the transition itself, but it does highlight the complexity and the challenge of operating grids, no matter what's connected to that as well. So I think that's just really clear. I think the things that I want to highlight here really is, we can't deliver the energy transition without moving the electrons from where they're generated to where they're used. I'm going to say it. There is no transition without transmission. And that's critical. We've heard about today about cost of solar coming down, cost of batteries, and solar cost plus batteries. That's great, and there's going to be lots of distributed energy in the energy system, but you still cannot deliver the volume of electrification that's needed globally without significant investment in grids. Current investment in grids is around $300 billion per annum. It needs to double or even go further to around $600 to $700 billion by 2030 to keep climate ambitions on track. We also need to be focusing on how we can get the best value out of our existing grid infrastructure as well. So within the Green Grids Initiative, we've identified 3 key areas of where the focus and the work needs to be globally. So one is finance and directing finance to grids to enable that investment to happen, and that means improving the regulatory regimes to make it more investable, but also leveraging climate finance to invest in grids. Currently, only around 30% of existing grid projects or future grid projects will be eligible for climate finance due to backward-looking taxonomies and methodologies. We've done a huge amount of work with the finance community to develop a set of principles that will unlock that potential with forward-looking approaches, which we'll be launching the finalised version very shortly, which should unlock a great number of those projects. So we need to direct that finance into the projects, and there's huge value and huge benefit from doing that. Kate Hampton earlier today was talking about leveraging. The World Bank have estimated that if you invest every dollar invested into regional transmission into Southern Africa generates around $23 of benefit, economic benefit. So grids and clean energy are going to be the engine of economic development, and I think that should be a huge part of our narrative. The second area that the Green Grids Initiative are focusing on is really about how do we build those grids quicker, so it's planning, permitting and operation. Some countries are able to get their grids built quicker, most aren't. So, some of the institutional challenges need to be dealt with there, but also operating the grids with high renewables. There is a fear amongst system operators to do that, and so we need to uncork that and unbottle that really, and show where system operators are doing well and share that experience and knowledge. And in the UK and Great Britain, we've had great success with that. In fact, earlier today, over 80% of the electricity was coming from low carbon sources today. So we're in a good position. Only a few years ago, we were saying that we couldn't handle more than 10 or 15% of renewables on the grid. So as a grid system in the UK, we've made that change. We're making that change, and we're working with others to solve that as well and share that knowledge. And then thirdly, we need to be able to build the grid systems and ramp up that capacity, and that involves the supply chain. And the supply chain is stretched. It's been, the focus on grids has not been there. So, renewables are being built, but the grids aren't being built, and the supply chain capacity is not there. So we need to find a way to ramp that up sustainably, working with the manufacturers, working with the governments, working with the grid companies and the regulators to ensure there's a sustainable and deliverable system to enable that to happen, because without it, the grids will remain the bottleneck. So bringing those three things together is going to be absolutely critical. And a key part of that is skills, and getting the right roles and the right jobs in place is huge, huge opportunity to build a really strong, skilled workforce across all the different regions and in countries. It's a real, high quality, high skilled jobs, which should be attractive and an important part of the transition. So I'm going to stop there. I could talk forever on this, but I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious that Ben needs to speak as well. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marcus. Some very strong messages there on finance, know-how, supply chain, and how these systems are going to operate and how we keep pushing that forward politically. So last but not least, and we're slightly ignoring we have lots of flashing red numbers in front of you. I'm going to allay the fears of our panelists that we started a little late, so we shall finish a little late, but right on time. So over to Ben, who is the chair of the Global Renewables Alliance, as well as CEO of the Global Wind Energy Council. So, I mean, Ben, there are so many things you could share with us. I mean, renewable energy has global supply chains. It's been, facing headwinds and disruption as of any other supply chain this year. There is some differences between deployment of solar and deployment of wind due to those supply chain effects. What's needed for us internationally to accelerate deployment of renewable technologies, in particular wind, to meet our renewable energy targets? Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt, and thanks E3G for this event. It's been really, really interesting today. So maybe just a couple of reflections. I mean, first of all, we formed the Global Renewables Alliance a few years ago and launched it at Sharm el-Sheikh. We then carried out the Double Down, Triple Up campaign under the leadership of our CEO, Bruce Douglas, who's sitting over there, who was, I think, one of the loudest voices at COP28 in Dubai. And obviously, we were able to help form a coalition around that slogan, and then had 200 countries signing up to this idea of tripling renewable power by 2030. And there was, it's a big number and it's a big target. There is some science behind it. The science behind it was working backwards from the net zero by 2050 report from the IEA and the World Energy Transitions Outlook from IRENA, which were working out what you would need in terms of new generation capacity from renewables to reach to stay within a 1.5 degree world, but then also doubling electricity demand within that. And that's basically the science behind it. It's a huge ambition, but it is necessary to kind of get us to where we want, with the assumption that demand is going to double at the same time. Are we on that trajectory? No, we're not. We are growing very, very fast, though, and I'd say, generally reflecting on today and the discussion today, we are winning. We are accelerating in many places. You've got very, very fast deployment of solar, in particular, around the world, and you've got a kind of steady, growing deployment of wind as well. And don't forget that within those scenarios, something like 70% of the new demand is met by wind and solar, right, in terms of the hours, generation gigawatt hours by 2050 under the net zero scenario. So it's a huge scale up that's needed. We're as businesses, I think we're in a strange position where we grow very, very fast, but it's never fast enough, and that's kind of the conundrum that we're in. What's stopping us is, on the one hand, I think these kind of mid-transition problems, I like to call them. So, I mean, on the one hand, questions around planning. It just takes too long to do everything, and there's many places where it's just hard or impossible to do things. So there's legal frameworks that just aren't there to allow you to build. And then for many places, we're talking about new regulatory frameworks. So, for instance, we made huge progress in Southeast Asia politically around the time of Glasgow. And Pallavi mentioned Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam came out with this huge power plan that had coal phase out in it, massive ramp up in renewables. And then since then, not much has been built. And that's just going through the regulatory stages to get to there, right? And there's quite a few countries that are in that stage, and they're coming out of it now. So we're seeing now good growth in South Korea. We're seeing new things happening in Australia. We're seeing the Philippines having its first offshore wind auction in a few weeks' time, and so on. So there's this kind of working through of problems. And then there's markets where you already are deploying huge amounts of power, but the grid can't keep up. And Marcus, spoke to that, and that's happening in many, many, many markets. So then you see not enough grids. You see questions around curtailment. So even Brazil right now, I mean, Brazil has been a real leader, has gone massive on the basis of hydropower, wind, solar, and now they're getting massive problems of curtailment, but these are problems to work through, right? And these are things that in the coming years, Brazil will work through. So there's those kind of mid-transition problems of just grid keeping up, getting the regulation to keep up with what the technology and the economics are. And then finally, politics, which Nick talked about this morning, and Catherine McKenna and other people on the panel. We are working through increased political volatility, and I'd say that probably in contrast to how we were looking at things 3 or 4 years ago, political volatility is probably one of the biggest problems that we face. And can planning and plans survive through the political volatility? And this was something Bruce and I were in and Elbia were in the launch of the Energy Planning Commission that the Brazilian government launched in Rio de Janeiro a few weeks ago, which is a really good initiative ahead of COP to try and get countries to look at that kind of long-term planning, grid, what's necessary to build out infrastructure. And I think one of the things that came across in the panel is how can plans survive the political cycles? And it's no joke anymore. I mean, we're seeing this kind of more volatile climate. And I think the work that E3G does and other people does is going to be more important rather than less important in the years to come. And maybe just to finish, political and diplomatic volatility is no joke when we're talking about supply chains. The idea of trying to make countries choose between one or other big power bloc you can be very, very destructive if you follow the logic. So I think the rest of the world needs to be quite careful before going down the rabbit hole of framing everything as national security or framing everything as a competition around certain resources. So I'll leave it there. I think as I said, we are winning. We're in a good place, but we definitely need to find out the right way to navigate volatility and keep the political momentum going as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to say we now have our next panel staring intently at us to move off the stage. So we're perfectly timed. But I was going to say, Elbia, if you would like to make any final reflection on what you've heard, the microphone is yours. It feels only fitting given your responsibilities this year. So.
Okay, final and fast. Energy transition as a good business. This is the final reflection.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a very, very clear takeaway. We wish you the very, very best in making that stick at your COP this year. Thank you so much to you and to the panel for your very wise interventions. And thank you very much. And over to you, Clarence. Thank you.